You won't believe what happened when a local HOA decided to take matters into their own hands, literally digging into the riverbank without permission. It all started quietly, with some residents noticing heavy machinery working near the river. One morning, at first, no one thought much of it, but soon it became clear that the HOA was illegally dredging sand from the riverbed. This wasn't just a harmless project. It was a risky move that set off a chain reaction nobody saw coming. The story unfolds around a small, tight-knit community where everyone depends on the natural river for recreation and beauty. The HOA, supposed to protect the neighborhood's interests, chose to ignore rules and environmental concerns. They thought they could get away with it, but nature had other plans. After the sand was removed, parts of the riverbank started to crumble and collapse, threatening nearby homes and the very safety of the people who lived there. Tensions quickly rose as neighbors realized what was happening. Some were furious at the HOA's reckless actions, while others were scared about what this could mean for their property and the environment. The HOA leaders, instead of taking responsibility, pushed back hard, accusing others of exaggerating the damage, but the evidence was right there. The riverbank was failing, and the community was caught in the middle. This story is about more than just a river and some sand. It's about trust, responsibility, and what happens when those in charge break the rules. As the riverbank continues to collapse, the neighborhood faces a crisis that could change everything. What will the HOA do next? Will the community come together to fix the damage? Or will this mistake lead to even bigger problems? Stay tuned, because this isn't over yet. The story goes deeper when you look at why the HOA decided to dredge sand from the river in the first place. According to some inside sources, the HOA board claimed they were trying to prevent flooding and keep the river flowing smoothly. They said the riverbank was eroding naturally and wanted to fix the problem before it got worse. But the way they went about it was questionable at best. No permits, no environmental study, nothing to show they were acting responsibly. For many residents, this raised alarms. It wasn't just about the sand. It was about who had the power to make decisions that affect everyone's safety and property. Among the neighbors, opinions were split. Some trusted the HOA, believing they had the community's best interest in mind. Others were suspicious from the start, remembering past disputes and frustrations with how the board handled issues. A few longtime residents even pointed out that the riverbank had been stable for years and that the sudden collapse was linked directly to the recent dredging activity. Meanwhile, as the riverbank weakened, cracks started appearing not just on the land but in the community itself. Arguments broke out at HOA meetings, with neighbors demanding answers and accountability. Phone calls, emails, and even local news reports started swirling around the issue, putting pressure on the HOA leaders. Yet, instead of calming things down, the board's defensive attitude made tensions worse. They accused critics of overreacting and spreading misinformation, but the evidence told a different story. The damage was real, and the consequences could be serious. People began to worry about what might happen if the bank completely gave way. Would homes be flooded or damaged? Would the natural environment suffer permanent harm? And most importantly, who would be held responsible for this mess? The community was left waiting, watching and wondering as the situation hung in the balance, ready to explode at any moment. As the days passed, the riverbank's collapse became harder to ignore. Small chunks of land slipped into the water, and nearby trees started tilting precariously. Some neighbors took it upon themselves to document the damage. Photos, videos, and even drone footage circulated among the community. These images painted a clear picture. The problem was not natural erosion, but a direct result of the sand dredging. This evidence began to fuel the anger and frustration boiling under the surface. One resident, an environmental scientist who had lived in the neighborhood for years, stepped forward to explain the dangers. She warned that removing sand disrupts the delicate balance of the river's ecosystem and weakens the soil that holds the bank in place. Her words struck a chord, especially with families who loved the river for fishing and picnics. The thought that their sanctuary was at risk because of illegal actions made the conflict deeply personal at the same time. A smaller subplot developed between a few neighbors who had long been at odds with the HOA board. This dispute suddenly gained new urgency as it became clear the board's decisions had far-reaching consequences. These neighbors started organizing informal meetings, trying to figure out how to push back against the HOA's unchecked power. Some wanted to call local authorities or environmental agencies, while others debated legal action. But uncertainty about the best path forward added to the tension. Meanwhile, inside the HOA board, the mood was just as tense. Some members privately admitted they hadn't fully understood the risks, while others seemed determined to protect their reputation at all costs. Rumors spread that the board was considering more drastic measures to fix the riverbank without public approval, raising fears of even more reckless actions, with emotions running high and trust breaking down. The community faced a crossroads. The riverbank's collapse wasn't just about land washing away, symbolized deeper struggles over control, responsibility, and the future of the neighborhood. What would happen next? The answer was still unclear, but everyone knew the stakes had never been higher as the riverbank continued to crumble. The sense of urgency in the neighborhood grew stronger by the day. More cracks appeared, and the ground near some homes began to shift in unsettling ways. Late at night, many residents found themselves awake, worrying about the safety of their families and the future of their properties. The once peaceful community was now divided by fear and frustration, and the storm brewing beneath the surface was impossible to ignore. At the next HOA meeting, emotions boiled over. The room was packed, voices raised, and accusations flying. Neighbors demanded the board admit fault and take immediate action. But the HOA leaders doubled down, insisting their dredging had been necessary and claiming the damage was exaggerated. The meeting ended in chaos, with many walking out in anger, feeling unheard and betrayed. The fragile trust that once held the community together was breaking apart. Meanwhile, outside the meetings, small groups of residents began organizing efforts to protect the riverbank themselves. Volunteers brought sandbags and materials, hoping to slow the collapse and buy time. But with each attempt, it became clear their efforts were only temporary fixes. The bank was too unstable, and the damage too severe. Rumors started circulating that the HOA might try to dredge even more sand to stabilize the river, risking further harm. Some neighbors fear that any new actions, taken without proper oversight, could push the bank past the point of no return. The tension was palpable. One was waiting to see if the HOA would finally step back and listen or push forward, no matter the cost. One night, after a heavy rain, a sudden, loud crack echoed through the neighborhood. Several homes near the river trembled as a large section of the bank gave way. The water rushed closer than ever before, flooding yards and sending shockwaves through the community. In that moment, the true scale of the crisis became undeniable. The question hanging in the air was clear. How bad would it get, and who would be left to face the consequences? Just when it seemed the riverbank collapse was the worst of the community's troubles, an even bigger shock hit. One morning, a group of residents discovered that the HOA had secretly hired a private contractor to continue dredging right under everyone's noses. No announcements, no meetings, no permits. It was a complete betrayal. The discovery sparked outrage and confusion. Why would the HOA risk even more damage when the situation was already so dire? As word spread, neighbors felt blindsided and angry. Some confronted the HOA board directly, demanding an explanation, but the responses were vague and defensive. The board claimed the contractor was brought in to stabilize the riverbank, insisting they had no choice but to act quickly. But without proper environmental reviews or public input, the community was left wondering if these efforts were making things worse instead of better. To make matters worse, local environmental officials were now investigating the site, alerted by concerned residents and news reports. This added a legal dimension to the conflict, raising the stakes significantly. The threat of fines, lawsuits, and forced cleanup hung over the HOA like a dark cloud, threatening to drain resources and deepen divisions. Meanwhile, some neighbors started noticing strange changes in the river itself. Fish were disappearing, and the water looked murkier. Signs that the dredging was disrupting the ecosystem in ways no one had anticipated. The river, once a source of life and joy, was now a symbol of destruction and conflict. Families began to question who they could trust. The HOA's secretive actions shattered any remaining confidence in the board, and the community faced the very real possibility that the damage might be irreversible. With tensions at an all-time high and uncertainty everywhere, the neighborhood stood on the edge of a breaking point, and no one knew what the next move would bring. The tension that had been simmering finally exploded during a packed community meeting, one that many hoped would bring answers and calm the storm. But instead, it became the turning point no one expected, when the HOA board tried once again to defend their secret dredging and deny responsibility. A group of residents stepped forward with something powerful: hard evidence. They presented video footage captured by a local drone, showing heavy machinery tearing into the riverbank late at night, long after official work hours and without any visible permits. The crowd gasped, the room buzzing with disbelief and anger. Faced with undeniable proof, the HOA leaders faltered. One board member finally broke the silence, admitting that their actions were reckless and driven by a desperate attempt to avoid costly repairs. The admission stunned the community, but also opened a path toward healing. It was clear the HOA had crossed a line, but at least now the truth was out. In the days that followed, the community came together like never before. Neighbors volunteered to help repair the riverbank, working alongside environmental experts who guided them on how to restore the land safely. Local authorities stepped in to enforce regulations, ensuring that any future work would follow the proper channels. Slowly, trust began to rebuild. But just as it seemed the worst was behind them, a surprising discovery shifted everything. During the restoration work, an old pipe was uncovered, buried beneath the riverbank, leaking toxic waste from a forgotten industrial site upstream. This explains some of the environmental damage that residents had noticed and raised new questions about who was responsible for the river's long-term health. Suddenly, the illegal dredging was just one part of a much larger problem. The community realized their fight wasn't over, had only grown more complex. But now, armed with truth and united by shared purpose, they were ready to face whatever came next. The river that once threatened to tear them apart might just be what finally brought them together. After the discovery of the leaking pipe, the community knew their challenge had grown bigger than anyone imagined. But instead of breaking apart, the neighborhood came together with a renewed sense of purpose. The illegal dredging by the HOA had sparked a deeper investigation, which ultimately led to uncovering a hidden environmental hazard that had been quietly harming the river for years. This revelation shifted the focus from blame to action, bringing neighbors, environmental experts, and local authorities into a common cause. The HOA board, facing public scrutiny, took responsibility for their mistakes. They agreed to cooperate fully with cleanup efforts and committed to following all environmental regulations moving forward. Some board members stepped down, replaced by new leaders dedicated to transparency and community involvement. This was a hard lesson in how power must be balanced with accountability, especially when it affects the safety and well-being of a neighborhood. As the riverbank was slowly restored, residents began to heal the damage not only to the land, but to their relationships. Volunteer cleanups, community meetings, and shared efforts created a sense of unity that hadn't existed before. The river, once a source of conflict and destruction, became a symbol of resilience and hope. Families returned to the riverbanks, feeling safer and more connected to the place they called home. This story shows how important it is to protect our environment and stand up when rules are broken. It also reminds us that mistakes can be opportunities for growth if we face them honestly and work together. The HOA's illegal dredging was a serious error with big consequences, but it sparked a community-wide effort to make things right. In the end, the river remained a lifeline, not just for water or wildlife, but for a neighborhood that learned the power of coming together in the face of crisis.